Welcome, rugby fans, back to Rugby 411. I am your host. My name is Joshua Shibata, and this is week 2 power rankings for Major League Rugby. If you did not catch the week 1 power rankings, a little information on how exactly I come up with this. There is an actual algorithm to it, but it is based purely on the actions of the team on the pitch. So it's not about win-loss records, though those do play a little bit of a factor, but it truly is about how a team in Major League Rugby performs on the pitch. Other factors, of course, we put into home field advantage, away wins, how many tries are scored, defense, just again, overall performance, which is why I do this based purely off of after watching every game played during the week. So sometimes these videos are going to be a little late, but I'm trying really hard. And I was successful this week to make these videos drop at least by Tuesday night, the latest of every week. Because again, especially after this video, I'll be doing the Super Brew and my pick'ems. We sometimes have games as early as Thursday. Fortunately, this week we have a game on Friday instead of Thursday. But I want to give those who are involved in the pick'ems in the Super Brew pool the opportunity to, be informed and think about their choices based off of the way I pick my choices. So I want to drop these videos as early as possible to give people as much information and also just to be as timely as possible. So let's get to it. Week 2 is in the books. It was a very fun week of MLR action. A lot of movements on the power rankings for this week. But again, as much as there's movements, I felt after looking at where all the teams landed, especially after the first 2 weeks, and again, it's just the first 2 weeks, lots of things can happen from now until week 16, the end of the season. But again, this is purely based on what has going on the pitch, and I'm pretty happy with the way these teams have landed. So let's begin. We have now a 13th placed or ranked team because all teams have played now in this week. And unfortunately, one of the biggest drops from week 1 to week 2 is the number 13 ranked team, and that is Old Glory DC. Last week they were ranked number 8, kind of in the middle of the pack, and now they have dropped to number 13. Unfortunately, in 2 games they have given up over 50 points to their opponents. Week 1, 57 points to Atlanta. I'm sorry, week 1, 55 points to Atlanta. This week, 57 points to the Austin Gilgronis. Now, granted, both teams pretty much up in the upper echelon of the power rankings, but especially after this week, week 1 they kind of went toe to toe at least for the first 50 minutes against Atlanta. This week they really did not show up at all against Austin. Only putting up 12 points, really behind just 2 tries by Renata Roberts-Tanana. Again, it's a little surprising. Old Glory does have a lot of talent. I wasn't picking Old Glory. If you look at my preseason rankings, I wasn't really picking them to be a very successful team this season just because so many other teams have really stepped up their game, especially in the Eastern Conference, which is starting to look like the stronger conference. But man, right now, the schedule hasn't really been favoring them, and they just got beat up for the last 2 weeks. So they are sitting at the bottom of the rankings. Again, have 14 more weeks to go. So a lot of time for things to change. Placed in number 12, a 1-place drop, is the Toronto Arrows. Toronto Arrows, Still not quite getting off of the longest road trip of any professional team. I mean, they got to play in Canada this week, but still not at home in Toronto. They played in British Columbia against the Giltinis. They put up quite a fight in the game. They were actually up at halftime, 16-12, but unfortunately, in the second half, completely shut out, completely dominated, 31-16. Granted, the Giltinis didn't start off very hot the first week, but they definitely looked more like the better team this week. Toronto losing the way that they did kind of dropped some. And again, they only really dropped one spot, so not a huge drop off. But again, kind of predicted the Arrows to struggle this season. Even though they had a lot of promise and they faced a lot of adversity last season, but still near the bottom of the pack in the MLR. Moving on, number 11th ranked, NOLA Gold. Unfortunately, NOLA Gold, again, another team I didn't predict to have a lot of success this season because they had a lot of pieces going into this season. But man, the performance this week was really more of just them being their own worst enemy. There's a lot of ball handling errors. They only lost 9-14 at home. But, again, a very disappointing loss for NOLA. 2 home losses doesn't bode well in the power rankings. I don't think it's going to get much easier for them, unfortunately. So again, kind of understand where they wound up in the rankings. Moving on, tied with the biggest drop from week 1 to week 2. Old Glory was one of them with 5 spots dropped, and the other team, the one that had the big upset week 1, Houston SaberCats, unfortunately dropped to number 10. Now, granted, their loss not nearly as bad as Old Glory's, only lost by 3 points, but man, just Houston is an interesting team. They really make teams so far, and again, it's only 2 weeks, but so far in the 2 weeks with the upset win against the Giltinis and this close loss to Rooney. Both Rooney and Giltinis, very strong teams. Teams that I predicted to be in the top of the pack in my preseason. But what Houston seems to do is they really make you play their game. They slow the game down, make you play a very physical game where they're trying really hard to tire you out. Unfortunately, they just didn't look as sharp as they did against the Giltinis. Their line play was horrible. I think they only won 1 line out that game. And, the commentators of the game mentioned this in week 1, and it really came true in week 2. The weakness to the Houston SaberCats is their edge, is on the edges. The 2 tries that Ed Fido from Rooney scored were purely on the edge. You can't beat Houston up in the middle. It's really going to be on the edges. That's where teams are going to find success. Houston, again, makes you play their game where they force you, they kind of funnel you towards the middle, where they just put a wall of defense in the front. But, man, if you can get around the edge, like Ed Fido did in Rooney in this game, there's no stopping you to beat Houston. So, unfortunately, again, not a great performance, a loss at home, and those do matter. Drops them down 5 spots to number 10. And, it'll be interesting to see where Houston winds up throughout the rest of the season. They have potential to maybe move up, but, again, I wonder, compared to the other teams who really rebuilt their teams, and granted, Houston totally rebuilt from their front office to their head coach, but I don't think as strong as the other teams. Like I mentioned in last week's Power Rankings, if they beat Rooney I would have changed my tune about them. But, I think Rooney kind of really revealed a lot about who Houston is. Not being a homer with the Giltinis, but I think the Giltinis completely underestimated them. Houston took advantage, and I think Rooney kind of figured out how to play Houston's game. It'll be interesting to see if other teams start to follow suit and if Houston can change and adapt to them. Now, a surprising jump is this next team who's really surprised me a lot, and I'm starting to become kind of a fan for this team, is the Dallas Jackals, the new kids on the block, jumping from the bottom of the pack to close to the top of the bottom tier at number 9. A very, very strong performance by them, losing 29-37. We'll talk about that score in just a sec, but I want to make a shout out to two of their star players who, on paper you kind of predicted them to do as well as they did, but man, they have been the heart and soul of this team. Adrian Carlisi and Eric Naposki. Naposki, of course, was the number 1 draft pick of the 2021 MLR draft. He's been a great focal point of this team. And Carlisi, as I mentioned before, he was a star player last year, is now being a leader for the Dallas Jackals. The weather in this game against San Diego was very, very windy, and unfortunately Carlisi missed a lot of penalty goals that could have honestly made a difference. But what was the real difference, and where I kind of pushed Dallas up ahead of Houston, is the fact that there was a very controversial try that San Diego scored, a pretty obvious forward pass that turned into a try. Surprisingly, no TMO review, which, is not the first time that this happened. It's not the first time that this happened this week. Or at least not the only time it happened this week. We'll mention it later on. But that try would have made a big difference. I mean, Dallas would have still been down by 1. But I feel that after that try was scored, Dallas kind of gave up a little bit. And I think if that try didn't score, Dallas would have still been in it, and maybe the game would have been different. But of course, it's a maybe. That's why they're still down where they are, because it's still a loss. But still a pretty impressive loss for Dallas. So I put them in number 9. Moving on, another team. Controversy, heartbreak, and just down on their luck team is number 8, the Utah Warriors. Down 1 spot from number 7 to number 8. Purely down a spot because of the introduction of Rooney, who didn't play last week. But man, that game, a heartbreak, a loss, 17-20 to Seattle. Again, controversy here. The final play of the game, where Utah was on Seattle territory, could have potentially maybe not scored a try, but could have at least tried to tie up the game with a penalty kick. But there was a knock-on during a scrum, which it looked, to be honest, if you did the TMO, it looked like a Seattle player's hand moved the ball. For whatever reason, referee decided not to TMO that play and called the game over. Don't want to be that kind of person, because it's one of the things that I've always harked upon with the NFL. Referees make calls that sometimes go your way, sometimes don't, and you can't just rely on the game based off of that. It evens out in the end. As many plays that go against you, there'll be plays that go for you. But man, especially with TMO now being established in the Major League Rugby, for those that don't know, TMO stands for Televised Match Official, which basically allows instant replay in rugby. MLR did not have it prior seasons. This is the first season that they are, which is going to be huge to make these plays and calls correctly that could really affect games like this one. Again, if that call wasn't made, Utah was right there, could have possibly scored to win or at least tie the game. It makes a big difference. And it just kind of sucks the way that Utah has been losing these last only 2 games of the season. It's very likely they could be 1-1 rather, or maybe even 2-0 rather than 0-2. So that's why I kind of have hit them up here. Now, granted, Utah also kind of did their part in not winning this game. For whatever reason, Mikey Teo not really been involved with the game, even though he is so talented. Was voted Player of the Year for Major League Rugby last year. For whatever reason, just kind of not in these games. He was not really much of a factor last week. I felt that might have been because of the way that their opponents played them. But this week, just really not a factor at all until he started making himself kind of get thrown into the game, which is just really weird because, again, you'd think a player of his caliber would be the focal point for the Utah Warriors offense, especially in this game with his teammate Mika Kruse not playing because of injury. It's just odd how the game has been playing for Utah, but yeah, kind of a heartbreak. Dropped down 1 spot though, so still kind of in the middle of the pack. Can't put them much higher because they are 0-2. Now, another team where, again, there was controversy because they were the opponents to Utah. Number 7, the Seattle Seawolves. Now, it is very obvious that the seawall of Seattle is back. They played really great defense against the Utah Warriors. But, man, they got real lucky with this one. Really lucky. Again, this could easily be switched. They could easily be from 0-2 and 2-0 to 1-1 each. But, it's just the way that, unfortunately, the ball sometimes crumbles. And Seattle got the win. But, I'm curious to see. Again, Seattle's only played at home. And, man, that Starfire, that 16th man really is evident with Seattle. Interesting to see what happens when they play away, which they'll be doing this coming week in week 3. Also, again, really wondering how they will stack up with other teams that have really improved their teams on the roster and on the bench. So Seattle, again, just like Utah, kind of in the middle of the pack, like where they're sitting, where they should be. At number 6, welcome to MLR 2022, Rugby New York, or Rooney, even though I know that they're kind of not using the United part, Rooney still kind of rolls off the tongue pretty well. But number 6, Rugby New York. And, their game, just like everybody else that played in week 1, very, very rusty, wasn't perfect, wasn't the fire-powered offense that one would think from Rooney. Don't look any further, there's Sam Windsor. Sam Windsor, the top-scoring player of all time in Major League Rugby, top-scoring player of last year, didn't score a point in this game. Missed 3 kicks. So, an odd night for Rooney, but they were able to pull it off, beating Houston, thanks to 2 tries by Ed Fido. I feel once they get past these first week jitters, they'll get back into it, and, they'll probably be the powerhouse Rooney that I felt in the preseason that they should probably be. Moving on, the team that didn't play, that got a bye, New England Free Jacks at number 5, dropped down 2 spots. I don't believe that a team that doesn't really play should move up any, and I'm not against them dropping because, to be honest, they'll have opportunities to move up if they win when they come back. So I'm not too against them from being number 5. Now we have the top 4 of week 2, and number 4, they were number 4 last week, the San Diego Region. They played really well against the Dallas Jackals, though there was the opportunity for the Jackals to win, so that's why I kind of didn't move them, even though they're 2-0. And it still was a good win, 37-29 against the Dallas Jackals. But again, with the Dallas Jackals being the new kids on the block, and there was that controversial forward pass try. I think it was a little too close to comfort for me, so that's why I didn't dock them points, but I didn't move them ahead either. It is going to be interesting to see what happens. No Joe Peterson in this game. Matthias Fryer was doing the kicking duties. Matthias Fryer actually got hurt, So Nanu, the legendary All Black, actually started kicking. Didn't work out as well. Granted, again, San Diego, it was very windy, so not exactly the best kicking conditions, but it will be interesting to see where their depth goes if Joe Peterson does not come back anytime soon. As we know, kicking is kind of crucial in the game of Major League Rugby. Interesting drop at number 3 is Rugby ATL, who was last week's number 1. Yeah, just that firepower that they had. 55 points in their first game. Only scored 14 against NOLA Gold. Don't know. Don't know what happened there. NOLA, like I said, is showing that they're a pretty good team. Had their own mistakes that cost them, but it just felt to me like Atlanta should have had a lot more firepower, and for whatever reason they didn't. Could happen, sometimes your team just doesn't show up, but to go from 55 points to 14, and they kind of did the same thing they did last game, where the second half was definitely not as good as the first. So kind of interesting to see what happens with Rugby ATL, especially when they start to play the two teams that are sitting here. And now I know this next one is probably going to get a lot of controversy because of who I am and my fandom, but hey, there's a good reason why at number 2 is the reigning, defending MLR champions, the LA Guiltinis. I'm not going to say that the Guiltinis are back. There's definitely wasn't a perfect game, and they were down 16-12 in the first half, but second half, 19 unanswered points and a solid defense as always with the Guiltinis. Not necessarily going in enemy territory, but going into Canada, British Columbia, not necessarily Toronto, and pulling off a win. A win is a win. Definitely looked like one of the better wins of the week, so that's why they jumped. It is the highest jump from number 9 to number 2, but there's a good possibility they can stay up there. It's a good possibility they can drop. Every week is going to be a little bit different, but definitely comparatively to the other teams that won, definitely one of the better performances, or one of the stronger performances. Obviously not the best, because that is dedicated to the number 1 team who moved from number 2, the Austin Gilgronis. What can I say? They scored 31 points in the first 22 minutes. Went on to score 8 tries, I think it was, 57-12. Complete utter dominance. I have to say, it looked kind of like the Guiltinis of last year with that performance. Now, granted, Old Glory kind of proving to maybe not be the strongest team in the league, dropping 55 points to Atlanta, 57 now to Austin. But you can't deny the talent that is on this team. Mark O'Keefe, Julian Dominguez, the new kids that came in, which I already said were going to be huge weapons for them. But then another one that I want to give a shout out to, Marcel Brackey, a USA Eagles, capped with USA, born in LA, so he's a local boy here, but raised in South Africa. Actually was playing in Australia for the last couple of years, where he also got his degree going to, apparently there's a Notre Dame college in Australia. Who knew? He majored in communications and at the same time was playing for the Western Force, and has now come back home to play for Major League Rugby. And man, was he impressive in that game. Definitely a kid to look out for. He also played during the Rugby World Cup in Japan for Team USA in 2019. But man, Austin is looking like the team to beat. Dangerous. They're really going to give the Guiltinis a run for their money in the West. But this is the power rankings. Again, the way that I look at it, I'm happy with the way these teams have fell. With the fact that Rooney kind of dropped down here, I still feel East is going to be kind of dangerous. With you got Atlanta and you got Rooney. Free Jacks still have to kind of prove themselves a little bit. But man, these two right here, Austin, especially Austin, the West does look like a pretty dangerous team. It's going to be interesting to see how Seattle and Utah kind of play out with it. And of course, can't keep San Diego out as well. But that's my rankings. Let me know what you think. It's again, it's really fun to watch this, and we'll see how it changes or if it changes with week number 3. So again, let me know what you think about the power rankings. See where your team fell, how if you agree with it, if you disagree with it. Let me know in the comments. And thank you again for checking out this video on Rugby 411.